Hello, everyone. My name is Muafaq Ayedi. I'm a data scientist from Tunisia working in an investment bank. You can call me MK if you find it easier. This session is recorded for those who are unable to attend, and the recording will be posted in the program very soon. Please ensure that you are muting your device so we can avoid the chaos. And I'm excited to be joined by our faculty directors, Professor Deborah Ancona, who is the Selly Distinguished Professor of Management and Professor of Organization Studies at MIT School of Management. She's one of the brains behind the content that you are reading on a weekly basis. This session will follow a Q&A format, and thank you to those who submitted their questions in advance. I will share a slide deck shortly. Please note that I will show the slide deck, but remove this after a short while so the focus can be on the speakers, which are our professors. Please feel free to ask any additional questions in the text chat, and we will get those if time permits. Another housekeeping note, if you see your question on the screen, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to the professors. If you are not, for some reason, you are not with us today, I will ask the question for you. So let's start. Hello, Professor Deborah, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Okay,
so,
well,
Professor, if you want to give us a little intro about something that specific that you want to talk about relating to the course program, then we will deep dive into the questions submitted by our wonderful learners.
okay, great. I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction. My apologies, I was not on the earlier call for introductions. My mom was very ill, so I was dealing with that. And before I get started, also, I know some people will have connectivity issues or whatever, but if you possibly can put your video on, it would be great to see the people who are actually in the class, not just the boxes with names on them. So that would be a request. So there we go, a couple of people showing up. That's good. Just by way of introduction, my name is Deborah Ancona. I've been at MIT Sloan for many years. I always think it sounds like an enormous number, but then there are people like Sandy and others who've been there for much longer. So I guess I'm old, but relatively, I'm an old timer, but relatively new compared to others. And I am in the Sloan School, the business school, the management school part of MIT. I have started my research work in the area of teams. That's where the X Teams ideas came from many years of study of what makes effective teams. Why is it that some teams are able to bring in revenue, able to create software and hardware products more easily and on time and of a higher grade of innovation than others, and so on and so forth. I then morphed into looking at individual capabilities because of founding the MIT Leadership Center, where we needed to come up with a model. It's MIT, you always need a model. So we needed a model of leadership capabilities. And there, Vonda Orlikowski, Tom Malone, Peter Senge, and myself spent quite a bit of time kind of meeting with successful leaders and decomposing what they actually did in their leadership change in the work that they did, and trying to understand, well, what are the capabilities behind successful organizational change? And the upshoot of that is the 4 capability model, now called the 4 CAPS plus model that you all have been learning. I was very impressed with your use of my terminology and the questions that were asked. I said, oh, these guys have really done their homework. So spend a lot of time in the Leadership Center working on what is your own leadership signature and how do you bring that forth and how do you develop it? And I spend a huge amount of my time doing that these days. In fact, getting very deep into people's family histories, even as they understand their own leadership signature. A recent article just came out in Harvard Business Review called Family Ghosts. So if any of you want to dig more deeply into your own family history and how that impacts you as a leader now, that'd be a fun article. And then more recently, we found that even helping people to develop individually or to run effective teams, they then go back to very bureaucratic or toxic cultures and find that the work that they were doing didn't last. And so that brought up all the work on nimble organizations, which you guys have also studied and read, and looking at what goes on the ground. So people have been talking about agile learning, nimble for a very long time, but what does it look like on the ground? How are companies actually engaging in this is something that is more recent, and many people are engaging in. So that's a little bit of my background there. And otherwise, I'm also a mom. I have 4 kids, all grown up at this point. They're in launch mode, going off into the world, which is quite lovely. And that's all. So with that, we can, unless people have any questions, dive into your content questions. Feel free, by the way, to raise your hands if during the course of me speaking, you want to add, subtract, edit, or ask another question.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction. And like you heard her saying, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we will give you the word. So we are still waiting for Professor Pentland. He may join a little bit late, but we have professors. Once again, please feel free to unmute yourself if you see your name on the screen. So I will start sharing my screen with you. And you should see the presentation and the questions. So can you see the slides?
Okay, so I'm going to ask that we go to the organizational nimble X team questions for me, because the AI and data questions are more for Sandy. Here we go.
Of course. So the first one is from Suzanne. Suzanne, if you are with us today, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to our professor.
Thank you. I didn't expect to be first. So I'm in a situation like many people where we have a combination of bureaucratic and nimble aspects. And I'm really interested in your comments about how to make a transition. And right off the bat, is there a better way to sequence a change?
Yeah, well, so the answer is yes, but there are a number of different sequences. In the olden days, there used to be this magic thing where John Cotter has, a very famous article about the 8 stages of transition, and this is what you do. But the world is much more chaotic and uncertain than it used to be, and the speed, as we've pointed out often in the videos, speed is just accelerating. And so that nice, neat packaging of here are the 8 steps doesn't always work itself out. Very often you're experimenting and something works, and then you have to redesign what you're doing based on what you learned from the experiment. And it's much more of an iterative process. That said, there are a number of ways to think about implementation. And we work with a lot of organizations that are making this transition from bureaucratic to more nimble forms. One is a kind of a top-down approach. So you've seen organizations like Microsoft, for example, where Satya Nadella came in and he said, we're too bureaucratic, there's too much infighting, the people here are not really open to the kind of learning environment that we need. And so he moved from the top down to change the organization to make it more nimble. And that started with the idea of purpose. Why are we here? Because increasingly, employees are not only motivated by money. In fact, we see this in the big transition. They want to have some meaning in their lives. They want to be in a culture of learning. They want to be with non-toxic leaders. They want to stand for something. So Satya Nadella started with, why are we here? He started his sense-making activity, and that's what lots of leaders need to do in any transition, is to understand what is going on in their particular organization. And he started asking the question, why should Microsoft exist? And from that, he garnered the purpose of Microsoft was actually to empower others to do what they wanted to do with the best products available to do that. So started with purpose. From purpose comes priorities, so that, MK, maybe we could, again, dump the slides and just have a conversation here. We can see more of each other. I think that that is more like a classroom, if that enables that to happen. So priorities, because anytime you want to make an organizational change, people have so many different things to do. There's so much going on. You have to say, here are the 3 things that are most important in this move to nimble. And he had customer obsession and a lot about inclusiveness. So 3 things, and technology obviously was one of them, because Microsoft at the time was losing a lot of raw talent. I'm just using Microsoft as an example, that this is for a larger way of thinking. And then he started changing his top people, right? Because he wanted people who signaled. Whenever you're a leader that is moving to implement change, whatever you do is a signal to others, and people are reading what you do, whether you like it or not. That's what's happening. So you need to be strategic about what you're communicating in any change effort. So he changed his top management team. The first person he had was the chief of staff, and he hired her because she has respect for other people. And he wanted to change the culture to be more respectful rather than people knifing each other all the time. The second person he brought in was someone to deal with external relations with other companies. Why? Because he was signaling that this was going to be an externally active organization, whereas before it had been very internally focused. Now it was going to have a lot of learning and collaboration across its boundaries. Another person was brought in for people analytics, to have more of a focus on people having good experiences. He put a prime person into his job. He had been in charge of cloud and enterprise software, which was a big area of growth for the company. He put someone in who was a very strong second to him in that role, to signal, we're into innovation. We're going to keep going. Come back, you engineers who have left us, because we're going back to cutting edge. We're going back to doing things that are going to put us on the map. So changing the people to communicate what was going on. And then he set people free in their various domains to innovate, all the while creating a culture of innovation. So he introduced the idea of a learning culture, or as what's her name? The psychologist from Stanford talks about a growth mindset. He set about creating, Carol Dweck, there we go, the name, a growth mindset in the company. So how do you change culture? That takes a really long time. But at the end of every meeting, he had people discuss, are you engaged in a growth culture or a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? He modeled himself how to come back from failure and not look for blame, but say, what did we learn from that? How do we improve from that? So he set a lot of different norms and values associated with nimble. So I think that those things, purpose, priorities, setting up the right people, giving them initiatives, whether it's engineering or marketing, to innovate in their own zones. He set up a lot of new kinds of teams. So in our lingo, X teams that carried out innovative behavior. And he set about changing the norms and values of the entire organization. So this is a rather long-winded answer, for which I apologize, but it's a big question. So that's a kind of top-down way. You all are not Satya Nadellas. You don't kind of even, well, CEOs don't have infinite power either, but more so than a lot of people kind of in the middle of an organization. And we've worked with many mid-level executives as well, and there they try to figure out how to put the innovation that they have into strategic terms so that it shows how it fits into the overall organizational strategy. But then they form X teams to show proof of concept. Okay, I think that we should innovate in the cases that we're talking about here in the zone of AI or digitization in some way, shape, or form, and then perhaps create a few teams that take some ideas of how to, whatever, enmesh machine learning or new algorithms or new ways of using people analytics, whatever it is, to try a few experiments with X teams to show people how they can work differently because they're engaging in these teams that are different, externally active, working on their ambassadorship and task coordination and so on. So it's teaching a new level or new set of leaders to expand, but also then you have data, because anytime you have implementation, you want to communicate wins. You want to build momentum around the change that you want to make by showing people what you can get from it. So there, you don't want to start too big. You want to start small and build a what we call a campaign of change to move the organizational forward. And if you don't want to change the whole organization, then move to shift your own part of the organization, whether you're running an engineering unit or you're running whatever it is that you're running. How can you take that unit and shift it in some way, shape, or form? So you can start small with 1 or 2 X teams and see how it works, or you can start large, a la Satya Nadella, or even larger, a la ING Bank or Fidelity, who engaged in major implementation changes by redoing the entire organizational structure. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. And I see that people have said UNICEF, very hierarchical, and changing. All right, so where do I start as a mid-level? Yeah, your pilot HR island, that's exactly it. Well, so then you work within Ronan. Is Ronan here? You want to sort of take that question a little bit further. And maybe before that, I see that Sandy is here. So Sandy, yes. I don't know if you want to sort of do a quick hello.
Hello. Yeah. Apologies for being late. I was editing a paper and somehow didn't hear the alarm to come and join. So yes, I'm here. So
it's perfectly fine, Professor. Hello and welcome.
Oh, well, glad to be here. I was interested in what Deborah was saying because, you know, my role here is to talk about how some of the AI tools can help in all these things, to help you, A, remember, but B, also to sort of make you smarter at knowing about the organizational chart, the X team sort of organization and what that's bringing to you, the interaction within your team and so forth. And so that's the part that I'll be contributing. So let me just stop there because I've missed.
Okay, I'll finish. And then there are a lot of AI questions, Sandy, including in the chat. So, okay. I'll finish this and hand it over to you. So yes, again, in the mid-level, you have to take care of your own innovation space while simultaneously acting as an ambassador to senior level leaders, because you don't want to be seen as renegades. You have to build allies in the work that you're doing. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we worked with folks at BI Pharmaceuticals, and the head person there, who was bringing in these X teams, bringing in this change, huge part of his work was as an ambassador to other parts of the organization who had a lot of resistance to what was going on. So he had to do the work himself. They engaged in these X teams. They created an innovative space. They were able to cut product development time, to change the way that legal contracts were written, to change the kinds of suppliers that were used in that organization. But then he knew that there would be this resistance. And so part of his job was to bring in allyship. He worked with upper levels of the firm to say, here's what we're doing, give us the resources to do it. He worked with people who had a lot of resistance and said, look, this is not just about us. You can use this too. And here's the results we've gotten. We'll work with you. We'll help you to do some of this in your own part of the organization. So you have to think about what the resistance is going to be to what you're doing and work those areas of resistance as you're moving ahead with your change efforts. You need to, again, model this every single day. So go back to Satya Nadella, even though he was at the head, but his first offsite, what did he do? He sent people off to visit customers. They had never done that before. This is senior level leaders sent in buses to go to visit customers. That underlines customer focus is important. So you can't just say, we want to do this. You have to figure out in implementing it, how do you reinforce this idea, the new ideas that you're bringing to the table. The other thing that he did was bring these other CEOs in, because he said, we acquired these companies because they're closer to the technology edge and we want to learn from them. So you can't just say we want a learning culture. Well, what does that mean? That might mean bringing people in who represent new technologies or new organizational forms and having them present to people. That might mean new norms for all of the meetings that you have. Whatever you can do, you have to think about change and what messages you're sending out and what new kinds of processes and structures you're bringing to the table. And again, managing that external interface. One other last thought on this, and that is a huge amount of innovation right now is coming through these meta teams who are cross-organizational teams where there are partnerships with other organizations, and this meta team or this set of people from two organizations are coming together to innovate. That's how we got COVID vaccines. That's how we got some of the medications coming through for COVID, et cetera. So think about another mode of innovation is to partner with another organization that knows something that you don't know, learn from them, and create a repository of new practices that runs alongside your existing organization. Okay, so I hope, let me just ask, Ronan, did that speak to the question that you had? Ronan is muted, so I don't know.
He says thanks.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay, Sandy, it looks like there are a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, there's some AI sort of questions, like for instance, for the UNICEF. You know, the thing that I think is probably the most misleading about a lot of these things is the idea that somehow you have to go big and you have to revolutionize everything. And that's what AI is all about. I think the record on companies doing that is not very good. because you're also reinventing all of the processes and relationships. So the sort of thing that makes sense, right, is just basically to begin capturing and analyzing data that you already have within the organization. So for instance, what are your silos? How do your silos talk to each other? If you're talking about ambassadorship or X teams, you ought to make sure that you're not just X teaming within the same old silo. You have to get out of that. And one way you could do that, of course, is you could ask people who else, what other organizations do you talk about? But that's unlikely to work really well. The sort of thing that is a much more AI type thing is being able to make a flow chart of what are the levels of communication between all of the different groups. So we've done that for a number of organizations, and what you find is that there are these organizations that you just forgot about, I mean, these silos that you just forgot about within your organization, and if you never talk to them, you don't find out their perspective on things. And the fact that they're typically not in the same building, or you don't have people that came from that group. And so simply looking at the flow chart of emails, of telephone calls, of meetings and things like that is extremely informative. There was another question here about RIF, which is trying to look at essentially the flows between people within a meeting. And RIF had, and I think still does have, something you can use as a sort of prototype for free. We can probably find that for you so that you can set up things and begin to say, well, what does this work? How does this work? To be able to look at the dynamics within your teams, or if you have meetings among several different people from several different teams, a cross-functional team, you might look at that and ask, who seems to have the most interest in what the other person is saying? So like if I say something, does this other person always answer? Well, that's indicative of some sort of an interest. And again, that's a machine learning tool to be able to do those. So I think that those sorts of things are good places to begin because you already have the data. There are startups and firms that do this sort of thing, including Microsoft, as a service. And usually they'll do something small, basically for free, just to sort of let you understand it. And then you can choose to use them or can roll your own. So I think there's a number of ways to do it. The way that people often think about this is in terms of marketing or customer relationship. And that's good, but you have to, there's an ethical component to it, which is that now your customers have to actually know that what you're trying to do and that you're keeping track of their interactions for that. So a level of transparency about that is really good. So for instance, in UNICEF, it's presumed that UNICEF is a good-hearted organization. Some of the people you work with might be worried about, for instance, their government getting hold of data about their actions. So you have to be a little mindful when you do things like collect data about your client interactions. And I think the most important principle is informed consent. So whatever you do, your clients have to be able to know what you're doing, right? If you ask your average client, what are we doing? They have to be able to give you an answer which is in fact truthful, and you shouldn't be doing things below the table. So we're going to go through some of those types of techniques. So that's a good way to get started. There's also, of course, large open source tools out there, repositories for doing these sorts of things. But to do that requires someone who understands how to collect data and how to apply these open source tools. They're not complicated programming or anything, but it does take somebody who is savvy with computers and data and has a willingness to sort of learn. And I also think that something that Deb mentioned that's really key there is it's really good for you to actually try these things so that you learn what data can and can't do. If it's this little magical pixie dust you sprinkle on things, or it's something that someone comes in and does for you, you never really understand what the potentials are. And so hiring somebody or taking one of your 25-year-olds with a computer science degree and saying, hey, can we do this little toy thing, and learning together about that is probably a good strategy too. Might not produce anything that's really terribly useful, but it's a good way to get people aware of what's going on.
Sandy, can I interrupt for
Yeah.
1 second? And I just want to, again, tie us together a little bit.
Sure.
And that is, whether we're talking about you as individuals and leaders or as teams, a key lesson that I hope has been learned in this class is the importance of sense making. And what Sandy is talking about is really deep sense making about what exists in your organization already, sense making about how it operates, and creating, some data source to quantify those kinds of things, to learn about what technologies are available, to learn about how other people are doing your vicarious learning, how are others implementing these new ideas, that any kind of implementation around using these new tools is just going to require a lot of sense making on your part, for you to fully understand what exists and now and what is possible going forward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so much of it is just, it's actually not complicated. It's just thinking of it a slightly different way and realizing that it's not scary. So for instance, we helped to do a project for the government of Canada, helping small businesses become savvy about AI. And so you're talking about plumbers and contractors and contractor supply people and building material small businesses. And you said, well, what does that have to do with AI? Well, it turns out they all have data about customers and orders over periods of time, so you can see seasonal variation. And if they use that data with each other, then the contractor would know when it's going to be difficult to get these sorts of parts and when to order ahead, and you can begin optimizing all of your businesses together by sharing some of these patterns in the proprietary data. And what they ended up doing is mostly very simple things on Excel spreadsheets, which they already had. I mean, they had the customers, they had the orders, they had the part numbers. And what they did is they started asking really simple questions about seasonal variation, parts, types of parts, things like that. And by sharing that, they could each improve their businesses. And that was really a great sort of way to start this path, is this realization that you already have this data. Right? You're already doing things, but what you're not doing is this sense making using some of the computer tools and the mathematical tools that are out there. And you may not be thinking about it that way. And it's that thinking about it, culture change part, that in some ways is the most difficult. Because it's not that it's hard to do, it's just not something that you're used to doing. So it's a new type of way of thinking about things for many people.
I just want to add, you don't also have to do this all yourself, right? You can engage. The whole idea of distributed leadership is that it is not the one person who is going ahead and doing all of these things. So, you know, asking people, okay, if you're trying to innovate, ask everybody to run one experiment or bring in one source of data that they think will be important and have them report out. So if you have everybody in your team doing one thing and reporting out, you up the knowledge of that team by whatever number of members that you have. It's kind of important to engage other people, even people lower down on the totem pole. Go have them do a customer visit. Go have them investigate another company that's doing what you want to do. Go have them take one part of a structure that you're trying to apply AI to and think of a particular innovation that could be made, so that it's not just you running everything, it's pulling on the collective intelligence of the people in your group.
I would add one more thing to that, which is that when you do things like that, it's not just the collective intelligence, you're also educating everybody on how to think about a new way of doing things and what the value of data is and what the value of sharing is, and that's the stuff of culture change. So it's sort of a great way not just to disseminate things, but to change the way people think, to see the value of this, as well as to learn for yourself and your organization where is the most value.
Thank you, professors, for your valuable input, too much insights. I myself, I have like some unclear points, and you like talking together, things are more clear even for me. We will continue with other questions submitted by our learners. I'll share my screen with you. And the question is going to be an AI one, which is the following. So, Balakurishi, please correct me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. And if you are with us, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to our professors.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, professors and MA. You know, I have a big problem. We have a lot of expert systems already out there in the client's organization. So trying to bat for an AI solution is going to be that much easier. But my problem is, you know, choosing the right kind. For any AI in a process plant to make any sense, it takes about a year and a half of data collection exercise, validation exercises. And even though you see, you know, a nice return on investment, let's say 18 months time, for example, take one example, we were able to show a company energy efficiency gains of almost $3 million per annum. But it never took off because the entire process took a year and a half to do that. So I'm struggling with this, you know, implementation period versus the return on investment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can start, and Sandy, I'm sure will come in, and maybe we can get rid of the question now, and again bring everybody together in view. Great. So I think there are a number of things when change takes a long time. One thing is to frame the change. People need to understand. So if they're expecting it to happen in 6 months, you need to make it clear that, in fact, it's not going to take 6 months. So be clear what it is. You can also actually show that S curve, which shows that it may be some time before you see any improvements at all. It may even be kind of Nelson Repenning's worse before better idea, that you might even go backwards before you go forward. So prepare people. People psychologically can handle change better if they know what the pattern of change is, rather than being hit with, oh, nothing's happening, because it can take a while for something to happen. So let them know that there will be that period. Another thing you want is the idea of the small wins, communicating whatever wins you have. So we're on this long journey, as it were, but look what we did. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. And you want to always communicate good news, always communicate that you're on top of the situation, that you realize what's happening, that there is progress. Even if you can't see it very clearly, you want to communicate all of the progress along the way. And those are some ways to mediate. You might also, storytelling is very powerful. So even if you are able to have one thing change, have the person who is changed by that communicating it. So have that person tell his or her story. Storytelling is a big thing now. A lot of organizations are using it, where they ask people tell a story about a good client interaction, and they collect thousands and thousands of them to showcase what it is that they're doing, even if it's one person at a time, one agent at a time. And so collecting those positives while also recognizing the long trudge that you're on. I don't know if trudge is the right word, but the long road with many ups and downs is probably one of the key things.
You know, I look at this as a instance of entrepreneurship. And there what you have to do is these first wins that are the most important. So you have to pick something that you know you can do. It will work, as much as you can have confidence about that. It's the simple thing. It's not the whole solution. It's just the first proof. And it should be something that creates a compelling story. So look, here's this very simple thing we did. You know, we compared these two expert systems. We found that this one the predictions of this one led the predictions of that one by 2 months. So now we can have a sort of pre-prediction 2 months ahead of time. Isn't that wonderful? It's saved all sorts of money and hassle. Great story. You want a story that people will repeat within the organization, that everyone goes, wow, that's cool, right? So a little bit counterintuitive, a little bit, you know, magical, whatever you can imagine. But that's really important. You know, so I mean, just as an example, I mean, take this platform here, this Rift platform that you're going to be experimenting with. One of the interesting things is, as a sort of a free trial, it was used by Asperger's kids, so kids that don't relate to each other very well. So during the pandemic, it turned out that they could use the feedback from the platform to be more integrated into the community. So that's cool. Like, kids with these sort of developmental problems can use this to be better kids. Great story. Cost nothing, took almost no time, you know, but it's the sort of thing that you would bring up to your friends. And I think that sort of compelling, simple story is something that will put you in the positive column until you can get more substantive stuff. And so you really need to think about the story that is being told and whether people will get excited about it and particularly repeat it.
Yeah, I just want to sort of underline two things that you just said, Sandy. One is the old KISS, keep it simple, stupid, that sometimes we as scientists or engineers go into huge amounts of complexity and data analysis and all kinds of things, which is good to do and good to have. But then for communication purposes, you want to really keep it simple. And also this art of storytelling, because our brains are actually wired for stories. We remember stories much more than we will remember a pie chart or tough kinds of equations that you put in people. So yes, that does show that you are learned and educated and have great data, but it's not as memorable as that one thing that you can, again, as Sandy said, pass on to people. So kind of just simple story arc of here's the challenge, here's the choice that we have. We could either do nothing or use this technology. And we took the challenge, we used the technology, and here's what happened. Just a really simple challenge, choice, outcome story is often very, very powerful.
I mean, I could give a couple more. We looked at patterns of communication within a call center, where they have hundreds of groups doing the same thing. And for just historical accident, what they would do is give coffee breaks to people one at a time. What that meant is, of course, none of the people that worked there ever really got to be friends with the other people because they all took coffee breaks separately and they came and left at the same time. And we said, well, why don't you give coffee breaks to the entire group? I mean, there's 20 other groups doing the same thing. It's not like you need to do load balance here. But what that does is that builds social ties among the people within the call center group. And that had an enormous effect on productivity and reduction in turnover, because now people felt like it was a more human place and they could trade tips with each other about how to deal with problems and et cetera. Another one is we looked at a large bank. It's a big building. Turned out they were having organizational problems in delivering new ad campaigns in this case. And when you looked at the flow of people emailing each other or calling each other, you noticed that the customer service group was never the one that was in the loop, as it were. And so that was a source of a lot of problems. You said, well, why is that? Well, because they were in another wing of the building and nobody ever saw them, didn't know who they were. They sent them email, but all you got back is a memo. And so moving that group in, so it shared, the lunchroom, the coffee pot, et cetera, with other groups, had a really fairly profound effect on the effectiveness of their that part of the organization. Those are really simple stories. I just told you two that you might repeat to your co-workers. Coffee breaks are good. Shared coffee breaks are good. I can tell you two or three more like that. The principle, however, behind that is, these are things you remember, you repeat, and what they're saying is the pattern of communication within the organization is something you need to measure and manage. Okay, very straightforward, but we forget to do it because we don't record what the actual pattern is.
So another example there is the Ritz-Carlton. The Ritz-Carlton comes out top for places to work. It comes out top for culture. It comes out top for customer performance. It's really a high performing organization. And one of their practices is that every morning, the staff from each of the different hotels will get together every morning, and one person will share a story of how they personally enacted the organization culture. And what that does is it makes the organization culture more visible. Here are the things that we stand for. And B, lets people have those stories of how it is that you can enact that successfully. And so they're great stories because it's nice to have a very wealthy hotel chain, but nonetheless, they tell stories of, a woman was there and her husband was sick and she wanted to go to the Academy Awards and she couldn't. And so they got her an extra room with a red carpet and balloons. And she was so thankful. for that experience that she said she's never going to go to another hotel again for the rest of her life. So that is a story of how what you do makes a difference in pulling forth organizational culture and organization success. So anyway, another example. So we only have a few minutes. I wonder if we want to go back to a question, or if some of you listening have particular things that you would like us to discuss before we end.
Yes, of course. So we still have 4 minutes, and Mr. Suresh have asked several questions. They are in the PowerPoint presentation. Suresh, if you are with us, please unmute yourself and choose which question you want to ask as the last one. So that is the AI and behavior one, and that is the humanoids and health. It's your choice.
Thanks, MK, for the opportunity. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Sorry, I'm at work, so I'm not able to show myself. My apologies for that.
It's okay.
Yeah, the question I would like to choose is in healthcare. How AI can transform the imaging systems. We have age-old imaging. We have the age-old CT scans or MRI, and some patients are very inconvenient taking that. So with the technologies coming up with AI-enabled imaging solution, is it possible to have a sophisticated machine that takes a scan and diagnoses the correct disease or problem that could help people avoid the inconvenience that is causing right now?
Well, I don't know what the inconveniences are, so that's a little difficult. But just one other thing you said is the machine diagnose correctly, I think you said, and that's problematic for a number of reasons. Machines are never perfect. If they're not perfect, you get sued. Okay? Don't do it. Just don't. It also has ethical dimensions. But what you can do is you can have things produce evidence for diagnosis, which then a human, a doctor legally typically, has to actually consider when making a real diagnosis. There are ways to do that that are fairly straightforward. There's a lot of difficulty in doing it because doctors like to think of themselves as the final authority and experts, and often emotionally reject those sorts of AI systems, the conclusions of those. Or, on the other hand, they're in a hurry and they just take whatever the AI says. Most of these are not, none of them are 100% correct. So that's why there was this quote that I had there about human AI systems. One has to end up with a culture where what they're providing, what the AI system is providing, is evidence, which in the end leads to a human decision. And that's the sort of thing that objectively ends up with better performance in the cases that people have actually done this, and legally keeps you out of trouble. So I don't know if that helps or not.
I would just add to that, a really, really important thing about adding technology to your organization is figuring out hardcore resistance. That is, who are the people who, if you implement this technology, are going to lose their identity? That's part of what Sandy's talking about with the doctors. I am the decision maker. I am the diagnostician. If you take away that identity, then I'm going to be resistant. So who's going to lose identity? Who's going to lose power? Who's going to lose control? Who's going to lose a sense of being the expert? And then once you've diagnosed those areas of resistance, you can reframe what you're doing in a way that helps. So NASA experimented with sending problems that they were having out to electronically to a set of people, and you got paid if you solved the problem. And one radio person who is not even skilled in the area won the prize of how to predict these solar waves that would be dangerous to astronauts. And the engineers in the organization, instead of saying, oh my goodness, this was great, we found someone who's better than we are, they just didn't want to use the technology at all, because we're the problem solvers. We're the ones who should be doing this, not some guy in his basement. So what they did was reframe, your job is not to be the problem solver. Your job is to figure out solutions to the problem, which is very different. It means that you can engage other people in solving the problem, and still you are the success factor. So you need to sort of think about these resistances and how to work around them. Or in the case of BI, which you either have heard or will hear, bringing those people in so that they feel like they're part of the solution rather than being the part that is resistant. So so that's an important part of any implementation, is to figure out, ooh, this is a great idea, but not everybody is going to view it that way.
Good. I see it's 11 o'clock. I unfortunately have another appointment.
Yes.
So apologies again for being late, and
It's okay.
look
Thank you,
forward
professors,
to,
for your
talking to you guys again. Take care.
Yes. Thank
Sure.
you, Professor. So at the end of this event, I want to stand to thank our lovely professors for being with us, giving us this great insights and valuable informations. I want to also thank all the learners and let you know that the recording will be posted on Reef. So if you still have other questions, please interact on the Reef by replying to the video link, and we will try to communicate those questions to our lovely professors. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week. Goodbye.
Thanks, MK. Thank you, professors.